Mattphilleo for Fine Art by Mattphilleo, and this is my very first YouTube video, and I'm going to be showing you some more advanced techniques on how to blend color, especially when we're talking about blending gradients from a dark value to a lighter value, and kind of how to get the intensity of color and how to work that in. So what I'm going to show you is a painting I have in progress. And let's show that here. This is a book illustration I've been working on for a couple of days. Maybe have about 10 hours into it or so. Move back a little bit to show you the whole thing. And this is a book cover illustration for Elijah. And Elijah's being taken to heaven in a whirlwind, and we have Elisha on the ground holding his cloak, and in the distance a chariot which is moving away. So that's the illustration I'm working on now. It's an acrylic painting, acrylic on canvas, a 16 by 20, and then to the left I'm going to show you the source photo. And this is actually a design I put together on Photoshop. I posed for it myself, put my camera on a tripod, did the self timer, and I happen to have an outfit too that looks like an ancient Hebrew outfit, and did the posing for that, both for Elisha and Elijah, and then kind of photoshopped the different pictures together into one cohesive image. And that is my reference I'm working from. Anyway, to get into the details of what we're going to be working on here, I'd like to specifically concentrate on the face, and then also use my paintbrush point here. Also, these areas here in his clothing, because that's kind of the cool part of the painting. That's where we have the highlights coming in. The sunlight shining on them, and we want to make sure we capture the intensity of that color. So I'm going to show you my palette here. Just a nice palette. I use aluminum foil to put my paints on, and to put the movement here. I'm holding the camera, but anyhow, I'm going to capture that highlight here using an Indian yellow, which is kind of like a yellow orange. And what we're going to do is we're going to mix that with a little bit of white, and I already have that here, and a clear medium. This is a clear acrylic medium. In fact, I'm going to grab a little bit more. And what it is, it's just clear acrylic without the pigment, without the paint, and that allows us to make the paint translucent or even almost transparent. And it gives it more fluidity as well. Your paint gets kind of thick. Unless you're going for the textural kind of painting, I'm not. I go for realism, so I try to keep my paint as smooth as possible. So I really like to have it fluid, and I get that by using this medium. And using straight water is not a good way to go, because that will cause that paint to sit in the crevices of your canvas, and that'll actually give it a very rough look. It won't look very smooth, and that's what we're going for, is smooth here. So I notice here, actually I was going to do the face, but I want to hit this area on his hand, and if you look in the source photo, it's a little warmer in color, and here I have it a little cooler. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to get a little more red in here, and just a touch of Indian yellow, and a little more glaze. And I'm going to go and see if I can warm up this area a little bit in here. That might be a bit too intense. We're going to tone that down just a bit. You can see here on the palette, with a bit of red and a little more medium, which will make it not quite as intense as we put it on. It'll heighten the transparency. So as we put this on here, I'm noticing it's still a bit too dark in value. So I'm going to need to lighten that up. And you know, a lot of this painting is just a back and forth process of lightening and darkening. And you know, I'm sure there's some artists that maybe have a little more of a precise technique, but I think really when it comes down to it, you almost have to kind of get a feel for it and see what works, and it's kind of a playing around with it. The main thing is that you know what you're going for. You have an end goal in mind, and my end goal is to make it look as much like this source photo as possible, although I do take a few liberties because, you know, I don't have to make it look precisely like that, but I do want to use that as a reference, as a benchmark, kind of like a blueprint, you know, like a architect has a blueprint for a home, and they're not shooting in the dark. They have a really good idea of what they want the final home to look like. If they just started slapping some 2x4s together, the end result would not be pretty without having a blueprint. So having this reference here is really like having a blueprint for me in what I'm doing. So what I'm doing here, if you can see, I did go in and capture some of that warmer tone to kind of mimic the look of what we see here, and just went back and forth. Now, one of the things you want to keep in mind is you have this darker value here, and yes, it's okay to touch your painting, especially if it's an acrylic painting. It's dry to the touch, but you have the darker, cooler value here, and right where that starts meeting the highlight, that's where you want to have your intense color. That's where you want to grab your reds and your orange and just kind of work that in. And what that'll do is it'll really make your lighter area, and this is not white, but it is close to white, that'll really make it pop if you can get that red-yellow kind of hue right in between the 2 points. Kind of call that myself, I have a little term for it, I call it the Tebow effect. And I'm not talking about Tim Tebow, the quarterback, the former quarterback of the Broncos. What I'm talking about is Wayne Tebow. He's an artist that more of an abstract, not quite abstract, you know, realistic to a point. I guess you could probably call him maybe a post-impressionist as far as his style, although he didn't live during that time movement in art. But he would do realistic, so I should say semi-realistic work, and you know, at areas where you had a contrast between a dark and a light, he would use a very, very strong color, you know, something like that, but even stronger than that. I'm going to wipe that away because I don't want it quite that intense, but he was known for that kind of a accent, and it would kind of undermine the realism, but it would make for a very interesting image. And I will usually go more for realism, but I'll intentionally add a little more of that than what you might see in real life, or at least in your photo that you're working from, your reference photo, because I think that will give your highlights a little more pop, a little more pizzazz. So you want to do that, but I wouldn't recommend overdoing it, and that does take a little practice, I guess, to figure out how much you want to put in. The thing is with art, it doesn't have to be perfect. We can't achieve perfection in art. We can't even achieve perfection in ourselves. So let's not worry if we don't have it perfect. Let's just try to get it as good as we can, and you know, just be happy with what we get. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding a little highlight to his thumb. If you see in the reference photo here, it's not focusing there. Sorry about that. You can get this to focus. Anyhow, well, I think it'll focus on the picture, but we're wanting to add a little bit of a highlight here to the top of his thumb. And I see some of that as well up in here in his clothing. We should have a little more of a warmer color there. I'm going to have to go back to the palette and load up again. And we're going to pull in a little bit of that warmer hue. I had some some Indian orange and a little bit of raw sienna brown mixed in, just so it's not too intense. And we kind of throw that in a little bit. And you can see that kind of spices things up a little bit here as we add that to the clothing on his arm. So again, you notice you have the light highlight here and the very dark value around this drapery, around just a fancy term for wrinkled clothing. And that is where you want to get those warm hues in. Again, you don't want to overdo it, but to get a little bit in is nice. I just noticed something. In my source photo, this area actually